Uh, Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. This is a very important webinar. It's a series of webinars that we are hosting. The main focus here is on the Brahmaputra, but a very multi-dimensional, multidisciplinary approach. We are requesting very senior people, domain experts to come in and discuss various aspects and how we can give certain inputs in terms of uh, policy intervention, technology intervention, and capacity building across various aspects of the river. I think strategically also there are a lot of issues that deserve attention, and we'll try and see what all we can look at. The first webinar was held on the 5th of January, where we had a very senior set of people coming in and talking about the various aspects. The recording is available in our website. I will not go into the details of this. Today, again, we have a very eminent panel, people from various dimensions, and we look forward to having a very interesting discussion and also get a lot of inputs to see how we can take this forward. We at MRC have been working on the underwater domain awareness framework. I'll be talking about it in my presentation after the first speaker, so I'll not go into much details, but the river and the marine systems are of very important focus of what MRC does. So I would first like to welcome Ashwin Pandya sir. He's an alumnus of IIT Delhi and has over 40 years of professional experience in water resources management. He began his career with the Central Water Commission in 1977 as the assistant director and later served as its chairman. Presently working as the Secretary General of International Commission on Irrigation and Drainage, and he has worked towards setting up web-based e-learning programs for dams and network safety, micro-irrigation techniques, and solar power irrigation schemes for international audiences. Many other initiatives have been taken by him for generating dialogue on transboundary river and interstate water management issues. Pandya sir, I would request you to kindly take the floor.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Commander Das, and all the eminent personalities that we have as our co-panelists today, Mr. Paliwal, Mr. Srinivas, and many others. It is indeed a matter of great pleasure for us to be here and discuss about an issue which has got a very vital importance from the India's water security point of view. I will begin with the presentation, which can which can set the tone for today's webinar. The most important issue is the development. Whether COP26 is of course an issue, but eventually for a developing country like us, we need to really see that the development of all the parts of the country progresses in an equitable and on a balanced manner. It is not for us to decide about what the individual basin or individual area will do as far as their management is concerned, but still how the entire integration takes place is very vital for the nation, and we need to really look at all our resources in totality, and looking at the resources in totality and also looking at the sustainability in totality, how we can progress on certain areas. And there, this relevance for the India's water security is the area that really comes to our mind, and then we will examine what is the role of Brahmaputra Basin. Yeah, so if we look at the situation of India as far as the overall water availability is concerned, we have got certain major basins. And out of the major basins, as far as the geographical area of India is concerned, the two basins basically stand out. That is the Ganga Basin and the Brahmaputra Basin. Because if you look at these two basins, they cover more than around 60% of the area of the country. and very major development of the area of the country lies in these regions. Since Ganga and Brahmaputra meet together in Bangladesh before joining the sea, so hydrologically we have to generally consider the Ganga and Brahmaputra as a single system, and this is the system which is largely draining the entire Himalayan range. Most of the Himalayan range in India is drained by these two basins as we look at it. These basins also have a characteristic of being international. There are transboundary issues are heavily involved here. In addition to the areas of the agriculture and industrial and other development that is happening. Now, if we look at the overall water wealth of India, then we see that we receive a total precipitation of 4,000 BCM. And out of this 4,000 BCM, what remains available for the utilization is somewhere around 1123 BCM. So which is like what you can say about 1/4 of what you really receive. And then out of this, we have about 690 BCM as the surface water, because surface water is quite crucial from the sustainability angle. Even though groundwater has been very attractive and a lot of development or rather overdevelopment or overexploitation of groundwater has occurred because of its ubiquitousness, but the major issue is that unless you sustainably develop your surface water resources, which are capable of regenerating themselves every year on a year basis, the sustainability doesn't come, because the groundwater replenishability cycles are very long. Sometimes they are stretching over the geological periods, and those kind of sustainability cycles are not possible for us who are basically tied to a hydrological and an economic year, which is much shorter than those periods. And now in the surface water area, of course, the current utilization is at the 450 BCM, but these utilizations, like the distribution, are not uniform. There are a lot of changes in that. Now let us see how this 690 BCM that we are talking about is really occurring. If we look at the distribution across the major basins in the country, we look at the Brahmaputra at the top. That means average annual water resources potential of Brahmaputra is largest in the country, even though it may have a relatively smaller area across the country. Like it has got something like say 1,94,000 square kilometer as against the Ganga's 861,000 square kilometers. And then some of the other very major basins like Godavari, who has got something like 312 square kilometers. Even though the area is small, the water availability is much larger. On the other side, if you look at some other basins, you realize the kind of shortages or the kind of stress that the basins already have. If we look at the basin, like say for example at the bottom of the rung, you look at the Sabarmati basin, you find that the annual water resources potential is hardly 3.81 BCM. Whereas if you look at the developments, if you look at the utilization scenario, you will find that the Sabarmati basin, with the so much amount of urban development, so much amount of agricultural development, is almost consuming more than its own average annual water resources potential. And in fact, it lands up over exploiting the groundwater in an unsustainable manner. Whereas in case of Brahmaputra, if you look at it, the problem is entirely reversed. With a very little area that you have, you actually have a huge water available in a yearly basis, and that is reflected in the problems that the Brahmaputra has. vis-a-vis the other basins of the country, the problem of Brahmaputra of floods is very well known. It hardly needs any reiteration. And then the associated problems of land erosion and the other human and environmental miseries that we have to face when we look at the Brahmaputra floods. So same thing, if you look at the population also, it will be the similar kind of situation. Now just look at the groundwater situation, that the groundwater situation wise, you look at the basins which are highly water stressed in the surface component are also equally highly water stressed when it comes to the groundwater component. So the inequitability of the distribution of water across the country is a serious developmental constraint. There are various sociological and other tensions that come up primarily on account of non-availability of water. There will be, Mr. Srinivas will be able to tell all these issues much lucidly, but the issue is that the distribution of water determines a lot about the progress or about the stability of a country. Now, when we come back to the Brahmaputra Basin in India, we find that the Brahmaputra Basin is something which has got a very peculiar kind of situation because its area available within the country is quite small. And out of this area that is available within the country, the plain area is relatively a very thin narrow strip, whereas the area which is primarily a hilly area and a mountainous area is comprising of a very large kind of segment of the entire basin. Now this situation makes it a flood prone basin when it comes to the uncontrolled flows of the basin that occur through the river valley. Simultaneously, it also makes it an ideal sites or an ideal location for generating the resources from the point of view of storages and providing for the rest of the parts of the country. So this is an opportunity and a threat. We are both having it existing very much in the Brahmaputra Basin as much as it does not exist in other parts of the country. Looking at the rainfall, again we find that Brahmaputra is a very peculiar basin because it traverses the Great Himalayan Range and it actually goes into the Tibetan Plateau. It originates in the Tibetan Plateau and then it traverses and crosses over the Great Himalayan Ridge and then it comes down into the rainward slopes of Himalayas, which are primarily affected by the monsoon winds. And that is why the kind of stark definition of this rainfall that you can see in this area. Whereas if you look at the boundary between the areas receiving less than 500 millimeter rainfall in a year, see, less than 500 millimeter rainfall is something almost equivalent to Rajasthan and all the other arid areas of the country. So when we say that we have got good amount of water, if you look at this boundary of this particular rainfall division, it will probably pertain almost directly to the McMahon line. There is very little difference between that line and what boundary we have. So it is very important to see that we are blessed with a lot of rainfall in our own parts of the country within which, and those parts are directly draining into the Indian territories and into the Indian landmass. So this is a very important observation. So when we look at the transboundary issues, we have to look at it with certain context, and this is a context which I find that we need to really keep in our mind. And here we can see that we have got areas which are so huge, like greater than 4,000 millimeters in a year, greater than about 1,000 to 2,000 millimeters in a year, which is the average. and they are the ones who are really contributing to both to its yield as well as to the floods, because this rainfall is largely occurring in a very short time window. That time window generally, even in this kind of high rainfall areas also, it lasts between May, where the pre-monsoon rains start arriving around 15th of May, and then it withdraws by the end of September and beginning of October, and by about 15th of October the monsoon lands up withdrawing even from these areas also. So in a very short window, this much amount of heavy rainfall is experienced by the basin component, which is falling very much within the Indian territory. So we discussed earlier, and now here we look at it from the other point of view, where we look at the basin-wise per capita water availability. And looking at the present population in view, we realize that even though we call Ganga a very water-rich basin and a lot of water when you look at it in the aggregate sum, but when it looks at the population point of view, you realize that Ganga is not all that great. You have got a huge population depending on that limited water resources. And when we look at this, you find the standing out of Brahmaputra. Brahmaputra and Barak. Basically, Brahmaputra Barak is a single system, but since it is not meeting within India, so we are considering them in a separate manner. But if you just put these two together, you realize the kind of per capita availability of water. This is a huge, more than somewhere around, I mean, touching somewhere around like 14,000 cubic meter per capita per year. Whereas you have to make do with availabilities which are lesser than the water scarce index of 1,000 cubic meter per capita per year. So the importance of Brahmaputra from the water security point of view in India is enormous. Then we have, when you look at the storage capacity that we have generated out of this availability, the picture is completely reverse. If you look at the areas like say Godavari or Krishna or Narmada, the ratio of storages that we have generated versus the annual water availability is much higher than Brahmaputra, where Brahmaputra the ratio is probably the maximum highest. Like if you divide 537 by 2 versus you have got this 46 divided by 25, you can see the kind of lopsided development that we have for the storages. That means we are not storing water where it is occurring, and we are trying to store water where it is already in a short supply. But then storages are required everywhere. It is not a case that you should not store water when it is less available, but these storages who are capable of tiding over extreme shortages are the ones which have to be located in the areas which are having the highest availabilities. And this is something where we find that Brahmaputra scores largely above everybody else. We have had a lot of planning, especially from the hydropower. Mr. Paliwal will actually elucidate in a much more better way. But there's a huge amount of planning that we have already carried out and we have already envisaged, which is already there. And this is a kind of a planning which will have to be sustained through various means of financing, socio-economic and political interventions, and a focused developmental area. So as we discussed, these are the highest yield basins in the country, and we have a single source that is now available for ameliorating the stresses that the country has as far as the water resources are concerned, and who are even becoming some kind of an upper constraint on the basis of the water availability or the development. Simultaneously, the basin also has to develop and for that, one of the biggest requirements that is ameliorating floods in the Brahmaputra floodplains, and then their water conservation strategies. We also have to recognize that these flows are occurring primarily in a highly rainfall influenced area, and some amount of flows which are coming from the less rainfall but high snowfall areas like the Tibetan Plateau are crucial in the absence of storages. Because of the absence of storages, those flows become very crucial for our lean season water availability. And there we need to really think about counter strategies so that we are able to manage those kind of issues which may happen in an adverse way as far as our neighbors are concerned. So we need to develop a holistic vision based on the hydrology and based on the overall strategic thinking. The role of Brahmaputra in energy security is, again, it is of a same kind of or rather a very important part, because the development of hydropower is essential for our INDC goals. In the early period of the environmental thought, there has been a lot of negativism that got generated about the hydropower. But then if you look at the COP26 dialogues that have happened in the recent times, you realize that the COP26 communities have realized that hydropower is not all that harmful. It is a relatively benign source of energy, and a very eminently renewable source of energy which is capable of providing you power at the drop of a switch. So the development of hydropower is very vital for meeting our INDC goals. It's a single efficient source of peaking power, whatever other sources you may have. But the kind of grid balancing that the hydropower provides is not provided by any other source. And there, when we start looking at the other means of generating power, which are essentially a kind of a base load kind of situations, and very strongly diurnal kind of generation, like you take the case of solar power. The solar power will be available to you in something like, say, 8 to 10 hours window in a day. And that also, the generation will be varying depending upon the season and depending upon the sunlight that is received by those plants. And this versus the requirement of peaks which are available, which are there in the early morning, which are there in the early evenings and in the night, you cannot survive without balancing act that is provided by the hydropower. So the energy security of the country, which means the energy remains available to all the consumers at every point of time and on demand, can be balanced if you have a good hydro and other power generation mixes. And for that, a single largest source of the order of 50,000 megawatt is something that cannot be ignored. And if it is ignored, it will be only at our own cost. Another important aspect is constraints of geography. We have got a situation in which our northeastern region is very loosely and very thinly connected with the mainland part. And the developmental requirements and also the strategic requirements need that we have a means of mass transportation available with the northeastern region, which is a very reliable kind of mass transportation. And there the inland water transport is the key, because as we have seen, the entire area is characterized by a thin and long and narrow valley, and this entire narrow valley is primarily having navigable depths. And when you have the navigable depths, the only issue that is required is that we have to maintain those navigable depths and provide our infrastructure. In fact, today itself, in the Hindustan Times, our Minister for Shipping and Transport, Mr. Sarvananda Sonowal, has written about the transportation of something like 200 tons of food grains, starting from Patna and then going via the Bay of Bengal and then into the Bangladesh, and then coming across and going in towards Guwahati. But this transportation can be very easily maintained all the way up to Pasighat, which is like almost you cover the entire northeastern region. And water transport is one of the main and very efficient means of transport when you have to transport it in bulk. So the inland water transport across Brahmaputra is a very crucial aspect. And then if you have to maintain a transport, you need an even kind of flows in the river. And even kind of flows will be possible, especially when you are capable of regulating the river flows in a manner which is manageable, and you avoid the extreme floods and you also avoid the extreme shortages. And there again, the management of water resources in Brahmaputra Basin and our transboundary implications come forward. So these are the areas which are having a enormous impact on the entire country, because as you know, we need about 50 to 60 billion cubic meters of water in the southern India in order to manage the water stress that is happening in those parts of the country. And there a lot of social tensions are also generated out of those issues. So those issues can be only managed if we provide the extra water. And now, as you have seen in this, the only source of extra water that is available to the country at this point of time is basically Brahmaputra and nothing else. There are other issues also. Being a middle riparian country, we also have a responsibility towards the lower riparian, and for that also we need to provide them also with some kind of a security from the point of view of the water availability. And again there, the developments in Brahmaputra are the ones which can actually come to our rescue. So the basin viability and the basin importance is extremely useful and extremely necessary for us. And I feel that we need to really work very strongly and very sustainably so that we can carry out the developmental agenda of the country. So thank you very much, and I will end my presentation here, and we will listen from the other presenters. So I would like to stop sharing, so you can.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
It was an excellent start you gave with a lot of statistics, the data, and the larger strategic perspective as well. And going forward, I would like to bring the perspective of the underwater domain awareness that we are progressing at the Maritime Research Center. And the UDA framework that we have developed looks at the larger, safe, secure, sustainable growth in the entire Indo-Pacific region. I club it into the Indo-Pacific region because it brings our focus into the tropical waters, and which has to be addressed in a very different manner. Many times the import of technology or import of know-how has not helped us, and that is something we would like to bring your attention to. So quickly talking about the geopolitical and geostrategic perspective, I mean, today you can see the larger interactions are happening in the tropical waters, which you can clearly see. But these regions have very unique political, economic, and many other unique characteristics. So whenever we are looking at the way forward or strategic vision, we have to keep this in mind. The Indo-Pacific strategic space itself is defined in the tropical littoral waters. So we have to have a very clear understanding of what this tropical waters represent and what this brings to bear when we have to plan our future. The Brahmaputra Basin, as very clearly brought out by Sir, is very important in multiple issues. One very important is that there are 4 countries which are sharing this basin, right from China, Bhutan, Bangladesh, and India. So we have to be very responsible we have to stand for our rights, but we have to be also responsible for the lower riparian countries, as brought out by Sir very clearly. One very important issue which I would like to flag right in the beginning is that China has significant water stress. I mean, this is a map or a picture which has been taken from open source, and they have already done enough to divert water and to basically look after their interests. And the western route is also something they are looking at. I mean, here there are three factors. One is the intention, because there is significant requirement of water. You can see that the northern part is extremely dry. So there is a lot of requirement of water. The second is the know-how and the resources, which is also not an issue as far as China is concerned, and the willingness to do certain things. So that, I think, we don't need to, I don't need to mention much on this. Pandey sir has anyway talked about it, and there are senior people talking about it going forward. So when we look at the Brahmaputra Basin, the people, economy and nature is something we need to focus. They are definitely intertwined, but there are a lot of issues. So when we are planning this, we have tried to request the experts to look at multiple issues pertaining to the people, economy and nature. Now, India in the 21st century, I think there are already a lot of things happening. There's a lot of focus at the policy level by the government, but how it translates to the ground is what we need to look at, and how do we all contribute towards making all this happen. So the river dolphin, I mean, when we talk about sustainability, river dolphin is a very unique species, and they are supposed to be blind. So they perceive the environment through sound. And with the increasing activities that we are planning, the acoustic habitat degradation is a very, very serious issue. So we have to keep in mind, I'm not here to say that development is not important, but how do we navigate development with better awareness? So underwater domain awareness becomes a very, very important kind of framework where we can navigate development or sustainable development through the existing concerns. I think Sir has very clearly mentioned water resource management is a very, very important issue. So I don't need to talk about it, but I would also like to highlight the water quality management. The availability of water is one aspect, but the quality of water also is a very, very important concern. There are many issues, which are of very serious nature. I mean, the domestic consumption or the domestic availability of water is something we need to really focus on. I mean, there are many parts of the country which the quality of water is a very, very serious concern. So do we have the systems in place where this can be managed? And I think India has reached a level of development where these are not a matter of luxury. And the second is the know-how is available. It is just a focused approach which can bring all this on a realizable platform. Now, when we talk about the underwater domain awareness, the maritime domain awareness has been something which we have been hearing for some time. I mean, largely after the 9/11 in the US and also the 26/11 in India. But my worry is that this has remained a security-driven thing, and the participation of other stakeholders has been a cause of concern. Just to elaborate, I mean, there are 4 stakeholders. I would quickly go through them. Security, now there is so much of activities planned. The geopolitical situation is also a little vulnerable and volatile in the region. So we have to keep track of security as well. How do we build systems where all our infrastructure investments, all our developmental programs are secure from a human angle is something we need to worry about. And how do we put systems, how do we deploy technology is something we need to look at in a very serious way. The second is the blue economy. I mean, we have been talking about the inland water transport and various other projects, but there are issues which we need to really look at. I mean, when we are discussing technology, we should be very clear that it should not create sustainability concerns. I mean, in the Northeast, we have been looking at various projects. I mean, even when we talk about the inland water transport, the navigability of the Brahmaputra is not a simple thing. I mean, many people who do not understand the river probably will not appreciate what it is. The most important thing is the tropical waters, the siltation is very high. And the desiltation is something which cannot be learned from the West. It has to be indigenously developed. There are multiple ways. Dredging probably should be the last resort. And there are many innovative ways which can really minimize. I mean, the cost of dredging in many places it is seen is prohibitive and makes the project unviable. So how do we build this in a manner that this is really taken care in a manner that the project doesn't become unsustainable? Even when we look at various other developmental projects also, it adds to the siltation in the river and it causes huge amount of problem. And many of them are so much interrelated. I mean, whether it is water resource, I mean, many of our dams are silted. So how do we desilt? There are issues which have to be looked at very differently. Environmental concerns, I mean, the dolphin, as I said, acoustic habitat degradation a concern. When we have such major projects being planned, the noise in the underwater domain is going to be a serious issue. So on one end, we have declared the dolphin as a national mammal, and also Guwahati has declared it as a city mammal. But we must also keep track that the dolphins, or particularly the freshwater dolphins, depend on sound to perceive the environment around them. So these projects will have an impact. So how do we kind of develop systems where we can navigate these developmental projects in a manner that they allow sustainability to coexist? There are many things. I mean, I think I will not go into the details of it. And how do we bring more and more science and technology into it? I mean, a lot of studies are required, a lot of research inputs are required. And I think this will require all the stakeholders to come together to pool in their resources and synergize their effort. I mean, in many parts of the world, particularly in the developing countries, we've seen there's a significant fragmentation among the stakeholders. We are not able to come together to really drive projects in a manner that there's a lot of synergy. So this is a framework which we have developed in the Maritime Research Center. If you look at the four faces of the cube, you can see they represent the different stakeholders, but acoustic capacity building becomes the core. And one more very important aspect which we need to keep in mind is for any underwater survey or any underwater data collection, the sonar becomes the key. But in the tropical waters, the performance of the sonar degrades by about 70%. So when we import technology from outside, sonars are not being built in India or designed in India to an extent that is required. So when we import technology from outside, that's a significant challenge that we need to face. So here you can see a lot of field experimental R&D is required, a lot of acoustic capacity building required. And unless all the stakeholders come together and pool in resources, it is not possible to take this forward. And from a demographic perspective also, many of our young students can find significant opportunities for employment, and if they can really skill themselves appropriately. I mean, the government is driving huge projects, but if our young people are not skilled enough or have not gained the appropriate knowledge and build the employability, they will have a lot of difficulty. Just to kind of bring one or two examples, the underwater radiated noise. I mean, so many ships are going to be plying in our waters, the inland water transport. So what happens to the dolphins? This is a serious requirement which we have to definitely keep in mind when we look at these issues. So we must make sure that we have a comprehensive approach while we are looking at these developmental projects. Sediment management, of course, is a very, very important area where we have to focus on all the three fronts, whether it is policy intervention, technology intervention, or even capacity building. I mean, these are some of the models. I think I will not spend too much time here on this. The riverine communities, I mean, when we look at development, even the communities will have to be kept in focus. Otherwise, there will be a lot of stress and there will be issues of socio-cultural dimensions. So the governance has to be far more comprehensive. You can see, unless we have a lot of data, we understand the unique characteristics of the region. I mean, this is some of the characteristics that you see in terms of the seasonal variations. I mean, when we even deploy certain technologies, they will not work in our waters because of these kind of unique characteristics. So unless we understand that, we will not be able to deploy these technologies in an effective manner. You can see these differences. Even we have built a 3D model also how to kind of look at the underwater domain. Even from the sustainability perspective also, a lot of modeling and simulation will be required. So I think I'll skip this part. We have been doing a lot of effort in terms of sensitizing people, reaching out to stakeholders and young people. And we have been running these kind of summer schools and sensitizing programs. These are 6 weeks programs and various other corporate programs to make people aware and bring them on board. A lot of field work is also being done, and we have developed these kind of capabilities, and we would be very keen to contribute and take things forward along with all the stakeholders that are there. So I think the best model would be outreach, engage and sustain, where, I mean, these webinars are some of the outreach programs. We are engaging with various stakeholders and then bring out sustainable projects where we can bring the policy, technology, interventions, and the capacity building. And a center of excellence, I think, would be the most important model, where we have multidisciplinary research center, incubation center, where all the innovations translate to startup ideas, skilling programs, academic programs, and also policy programs. So I will stop here, and I would request Srinivas Sukakula sir. Dr. Srinivas is the Ministry of Jal Shakti Research Chair. He is a political geographer with a PhD from the University of Washington, Seattle, and has earlier degrees in environmental planning and civil engineering. He is also a British Council Chevening Scholar and recipient of many other fellowships and scholarships. His work extends for over 20 years in academia, professional and voluntary sectors, covering wide-ranging topics on water conflicts, natural resources, management, urban and regional planning, governance, disaster response and reconstructions. With his current research interests focus on transboundary water conflicts, development studies and state-society relations in South Asia. Dr. Srinivas, I would request you to take this.
Thank you very much for having me and having me to join this distinguished panel. I just, I'm sorry, but I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, but you know, the time allocated is 15 minutes. I thought that it wouldn't have much space to bring in a comprehensive PowerPoint presentation. But I do want to sort of build on both the previous presentations, particularly Pandya sir's overarching context for Brahmaputra River Basin and its governance. He has highlighted several of those aspects, but particularly focusing more on the technical and some of those things that we take it for granted, and we unfortunately don't critically engage with the ground realities. Instead, we pick up on some rhetorics and turn them into a kind of spectacles, as a kind of conflict situation between between territories. I just wanted to start off with giving the broader, as I did say, build on what Pandya sir, and would also touch upon what you mentioned about it, particularly on governing the ecosystems, and then give a context about the idea of water conflicts and governance in the Brahmaputra Basin, hopefully connecting closely with the Brahmaputra Basin. In the first place, I think it is something that you have established and Pandya sir has established, is that it is something one has to recognize Brahmaputra Basin as one of those unique contexts where you have both national as well as international transboundary challenges in terms of governance challenges. See, it's an interstate river as well as an international river, as you all know. Now, the challenge is that it is, whether you take surface water governance or subsurface water governance, including the underwater dynamics or the ecosystem management, something that needs to be recognized and acknowledged is that there is a need for interterritorial governance in order to pursue those goals that you mentioned, as well as Pandya sir mentioned, as part of the developmental agenda, which is something that has not been given adequate attention in the Brahmaputra Basin. And then the second aspect of it is that you mentioned as a theme is in the backdrop of COP26, which received the focus is on the climate change. But one thing that we need to recognize is that the link between climate change and the hydrological regimes, like the Brahmaputra River Basin, is something that is under or less understood. I mean, I'll just give you an example of the recently published UN Water report on climate change and water. What it says is that there is an overwhelming evidence about the impacts of climate change over hydrological regimes, but there is still significant ambiguities about how these impact at the regional and local scales. So there is a big research gap between the climate change and the kind of impact that we would have on hydrological regimes. And some of those data and the kind of conditions that Pandya sir has mentioned in his presentations would have significant variations because of climate change. We don't know whether it's certainly we know that there's going to be extreme events. So that is something that we need to recognize when we talk about transboundary water sharing, whether it is interstate or international in the Brahmaputra Basin. And the third one, I just wanted to sort of share with you the latest status of the way transboundary water sharing is understood. Very often we put them in the kind of binaries of conflict and cooperation. And there is an increasing body of work, particularly interdisciplinary, bringing in several disciplinary approaches to understand transboundary water context, saying that the binaries don't work. And transboundary water sharing is a context where you will have a coexistence of conflict as well as cooperation. And it is also increasingly realized that the legal responses to a conflict situation, a transboundary conflict situation, is going to be having a limited impact in mitigating the consequences, the adverse consequences. What is required is that the legal responses need to be supplemented with both political as well as institutional responses. So when we talk about interstate water governance, it's not just sufficient for us to have an Interstate River Water Disputes Resolution Act 1956, but we need to also have robust institutional models to make sure that the awards or otherwise agreements are given effect. And that's partly the reason why you see an increasing emergence or recurrence of the disputes. And that is partly the reason why much of the attention of the public discourse is actually caught up in this whole, quote unquote water wars kind of frame and the specter of water wars that might happen because of this. So, having recognized the fact that it is a Brahmaputra is something basin is something that brings in, it's a confluence of national as well as international transboundary challenges. And then we also have significant, gaps when it comes to understanding the impacts of, climate change on the hydrological regimes, whether you take surface water dynamics or subsurface water dynamics or underwater dynamics as you are focusing on. And the third one is that there is something that we need to recognize is that we can't overemphasize on legal solutions, and we need to also supplement these legal solutions with the right kind of political processes as well as institutional models to ensure that the coordination, transboundary coordination is pursued. Having said that, let's come to that, those policy and governance challenges when it comes to interstate governance or transboundary governance, and then international transboundary governance, particularly with a particular attention to what is happening within Brahmaputra Basin. I mean, this is something that I can't necessarily have to elaborate on about the not necessarily very inspiring, track record when it comes to interstate river water disputes. Everybody is aware of the kind of how interstate water conflicts, when they recur or when they emerge, actually capture the entire nation's attention, and then pretty much takes over the discourse, the entire discourse within India. And that's partly because of the serious gaps when it comes to, as I did say, that there has been an over reliance on on legalist responses when it comes to, and we keep relying on tribunals or otherwise courts when it comes to resolving these disputes. And it is also because of certain amount of neglected aspects. As I did say, it's not just sufficient to have legal responses. We must have political as well as institutional responses. I'll just give you an example. When it comes to resolving disputes, we have two legislations within India when it comes to interstate river water sharing differences or conflicts. One is Interstate River Water Disputes Act 1956, which is to resolve disputes. And the other one is River Boards Act to enable cooperation between states. And now we know that the disputes that we have had so far, which are about 9, and none of them have had satisfactory outcomes, except barring 1 or 2. But obviously, you need to sort of explain this in a particular in their context. But we know that these disputes keep recurring. And when it comes to River Boards Act, which is supposed to support, enable interstate cooperation, the fact is this: is that the act was legislated in 1956, along with the Interstate River Water Disputes Act 1956, but not a single board that has been constituted so far within India to enable or facilitate interstate cooperation uses the force of that law. Now, this actually, asks the question: when there is that particular legislation, why does it that we choose to create or pursue alternative channels to create, these river boards, which are interstate cooperation institutions? So, I mean, if you take Brahmaputra board, that has been set up through a separate parliamentary act. The question for us right now, unfortunately, that literature that is existing doesn't explain clearly why we had to choose a separate act when we have a River Boards Act 1956. At the same time, you know how the Brahmaputra board has been able to address the challenges within the northeast region. Now, those are the kind of policy and institutional gaps that we have right now when it comes to interstate river water conflicts. And then at the same time, you know that there are several of those disputes that we have. Very often, these disputes, the tribunals give away awards, but those awards are not given effect. And we just recently have, it's only recently that under the, because of the fiat from the Supreme Court, a Kaveri Water Management Authority has been constituted. And we still have to know whether this particular model that has been created would actually address or enable that interstate cooperation, or otherwise give effect to those disputes, the award that was given already, because Kaveri Basin has been fortunate to have good monsoon since the authority has been set up. So the institutional models themselves are not available to ensure effective coordination, whether it is about to pursue developmental agenda or otherwise to address the environmental concerns or disaster risks when it comes to that part. However, while the legislations are, their track record is not so great, the fact also remains that something that we haven't been able to give attention to is that India has a remarkable track record of interstate cooperation. I mean, there are, in contrast to the 9 disputes that I mentioned, we have got more than 200. I mean, if you see, Central Water Commission itself has documented about 160, and we have been working with them, and then we know that there are more than 200 interstate agreements over river water governance. Now you have this very, peculiar but contrasting situation where you have half glass, full with such a remarkable track record of cooperation, whereas you have this half glass empty, which is about this very intractable interstate water disputes. But we end up actually focusing a great deal on this half glass empty, whereas we don't really understand what are those conditions that are conducive to, contribute to such a remarkable interstate water cooperation. So that's another knowledge gap that we have, that we can easily build upon, because there is an experiential understanding about why interstate, rivers or states cooperate between themselves. Now that is about interstate river water governance. Now, when it comes to international transboundary dimension, I mean, something that strikes you is that, and we know that very often when it comes to international transboundary water sharing governance, the only reliance for us or otherwise that we depend upon is the UN Convention of 1997. It is about the law of non-navigational international river courses. Now, when it comes to South Asian geopolitical conditions, including China, and because we are talking about Brahmaputra context, now you have very uneven geopolitical responses when it comes to this particular convention, UN convention, which actually has, codifies international principles for how we should go about international transboundary water sharing, and also what kind of institutional responses should be in place to deal with, developmental, environmental, as well as risk responses. Now, however, the unfortunate situation is that you have this condition where China has rejected the UN convention, India has abstained it, and then you have Bangladesh and then Bhutan kind of in favor of this UN convention. So once you have this uneven geopolitical response, what you end up with is basically bilateral responses. So it is something that we need to recognize that given the kind of uneven geopolitical situation, we continue to rely on bilateral responses, and we need to consolidate these towards more multilateral responses, particularly given the kind of emerging risks, whether it is through climate change or otherwise other kind of risks of floods that we have in Brahmaputra Basin. Now, when it comes to responding to these risks that we have in Brahmaputra Basin, what are the kind of institutional spaces that we have? We know that the UN Convention 1997 is something that we can not rely a great deal upon. Obviously, what is the kind of at least existing cooperation that is there between these, riparian nations of Brahmaputra? I mean, the only thing that we can boast of is the kind of the MOU between China and India, where there is a a simple agreement about sharing the data, hydrological data, so that there could be an effective flood response. The MOU basically enables or otherwise supports, or the agreement basically about China's, not necessarily an obligation, because it's China's willingness to share hydrological data in particular seasons at a particular cost. So India pays some money to get that data in certain seasons. And it is so vulnerable that when the Doklam standoff happened, China refused to share that data, in spite of the fact that India is willing to pay for it. So it's such a vulnerable institutional, framework or structures that we have to respond to transboundary challenges, even for such an important and and critical risk of floods in Brahmaputra. And as you know, I mean, as when it comes to that, I mean, you don't have an issue of you can't rely on SARC because China is not, is not a participant. At the same time, SARC is, that its status in terms of how well we have been able to use the platform to respond to South Asian transboundary challenges. So, given this context, I think one has to sort of start thinking about taking the context, concerns from the interstate challenges themselves, and then start looking at what kind of avenues are there to build upon towards responding to transboundary challenges within the Brahmaputra Basin. It's not that we don't have a full-blown dispute within Northeast over Brahmaputra, but we do know that there has been, the conflictual condition is simmering for a while, and particularly something that you know of is that when the Subansiri Dam was proposed, there is Assam had serious concerns about it. At the same time, the kind of ambitions that we have about inland navigation or other kind of developmental activities, at the same time also responding to the kind of concerns that you have raised when it comes to environmental issues. These are those challenges that are emerging, and there is the policy and the institutional response. If you look at how the kind of structures that we have in place, they are not very inspiring. I mean, Brahmaputra board has been simply there to just create or prepare master plans. And of course, there is a proposal to create this new NUMA, which is Northeast Water Management Authority. We don't really know how well, because it has to be still in place, and we don't really know how well it can respond to these kind of transboundary challenges. So I'll just leave it there at highlighting those policy and governance challenges. and then look forward to hearing the rest of the proceeding. Thank you. I hope I didn't take more than what I was allocated.
Thank you so much, Dr. Srinivas. Indeed, you touched upon some very important issues, and I mean, these are focus areas where a lot more work is required, and I think we all need to come together and look at them more seriously. The institutional mechanism is what you brought out very, very clearly, and I think that's something very, very important. Our next speaker is Shri Nityanand Rai. He's the Director Hydrology Northeast in the Central Water Commission. He's a graduate in civil engineering from Kamala Nehru Institute of Technology, Sultanpur, and did his postgraduate in hydrology from IIT Roorkee. He joined the CWC in 1995 as an assistant director and has since then worked in the field of hydrological and hydrodynamic modeling. He has carried out the hydrological and hydrodynamic modeling for more than 70 river valley projects for water availability studies, designed flood estimation, dam break studies, glacial lake outbursts, flood studies, backwater studies, reservoir sedimentation profile studies, backwater studies, surge analysis, reservoir and channel routing studies. He has also written and presented 14 technical papers in the field of hydrodynamic and hydrological modeling for various national and international conferences. Rai sir, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I'm going to most of the things I have already been highlighted by Pandya sir, but little bit deep I will go on the certain issues. So I am going to talk regarding issues related to northeastern water resources, and in this, basically I am going to focus this Brahmaputra river basin only. So what you are seeing, this is the river basin maps in India showing the different basins, and this is the Brahmaputra basin. Whenever we are talking about the Brahmaputra basin, so this one of my favorite, just to show you the basin wise water availability, because if you see all these pillars, so Brahmaputra is the longest one, and around 537 BCM water is available in this basin. This is the average water availability in Brahmaputra basin. And the beauty of this basin is that even if you see the gap in between different dependable flows, then the gap is not so huge if you compare with the other basins. So that's why Brahmaputra becomes a very peculiar basin in terms of water availability also. And the main reason of that is a significant amount of water in this basin is we are getting from Tibet region, that is from the snow melt and glacier melt, and huge quantity of water in Indian territory also that we are getting through very good amount of rainfall. And here the rainfall in this basin, if you compare consider entire basin in India itself, then the amount of rainfall is something around 2800 millimeter to 3000 millimeter. And this basin wise water availability had already been discussed by Pandya sir. So only thing what I want to show here, ki if you see the per capita water availability in Brahmaputra, so that is a very huge one, around more than 13,500, that is meter cube per capita per year. And if you see the other basins, so a lot of basins are in India are either water stress or either water scarce. So if you overall consider the India water security through national water grid, then again this Brahmaputra basin becomes very important aspect of the planning or execution of the national water grid. This is the some salient features of this Brahmaputra river, because I am director hydrology, so these things are quite interesting for me. The total length of the main stem of the river is something around 2900 kilometer, and length in Tibet region is about 1625 kilometer. Length within India is about 918 kilometer. Total catchment area of this basin is around 5,80,000 square kilometer, and area within the area is around 195,000 square kilometer. But this 195,000 square kilometer of that area where we are receiving a good amount of rainfall. So the what are the different potential of this basin? One is I would start with the first inter basin transport. If you consider the national water grid concept, then for our water security point of view, this Brahmaputra basin, Brahmaputra river becomes very important, and some links were also planned. Like one was the Manas Sankos Tista Ganga link, in that around 40 BCM of water was proposed to transfer in the other river basins. Then another important aspect that if you consider in terms of green energy, so this Brahmaputra basin, it is having a vast unutilized hydropower potential, something around 59,000 megawatt of power. Out of that, very little has been developed so far, less than 2% or something like that. Then vast utilization of irrigation potential also. If you see here, only so far the total storage which has been developed in this basin is only 2.33 BCM, while around 50 BCM water storage can be provided in this basin. Then another problem of this basin is which has been highlighted by Dr. Das also, this siltation problem and erosion problem. Like one this Majuli Island, that is a lot of erosion protection work is going on. And apart from that, if you consider from navigability point of view, those the siltation and all those issues are associated with this issue. Then waterway and river tourism, the waterway development as a total grid, that is this basin is having a lot of potential in that regard. Yes, certainly this dolphin issues and other issues are there, and I was also a part of the Ministry of Environment and Forests this expert appraisal committee for 6 years, and I have dealt these issues very minutely, and I have discussed at different forums. Even when we were discussing this Subansiri, lower Subansiri issue, when this construction was halted because of the agitation at that time, also one of the major concern was whether the sufficient flow is available for the survival of dolphins. So for that, I can assure everybody ki when this almost for all the sub basins like Subansiri, Siang, Dibang, Lohit, basin studies, cumulative basin study has already been got carried out by MOF and CC, and in those basin studies, adequate amount of environmental flow recommendations have been made. So as far as whenever we are talking about the development, so we have to take into account the environmental concern also. So a judicious combination of development and environmental concern is essential to go ahead with our desired goals regarding the development. This is a very important just PPT. What you are seeing, this is the rainfall scenario and floodway formation. Because whenever we talk about the Brahmaputra, then as Pandya sir already presented, key significant area lies in the plain area, which is very having a slope of the order of say 1:5,000 to 1:10,000. Then a significant, like in Arunachal Pradesh or other northeastern states, a lot of territories, hilly terrain, where the slopes are very steep. And another important aspect is the rainfall scenario. If you see this, what you call this McMahon line or boundary with this China. So if you see in the Tibet region, your I have computed what is the average annual rainfall in the Tibet region in the Brahmaputra basin. It is something around 280 millimeter. But once you come in the Indian territory, then the average rainfall comes out something around 2,800 millimeter. But not only that 2,800 millimeter is important, you have to see there are certain pockets where the rainfall is extremely high, like some area of the Dibang sub-basin, some area of the Lohit sub-basin are like that, where the average annual rainfall is of the order of 5,500 millimeter. And then just before the Great Bend, where this is the Great Bend, where this river is taking this southward turn, and in that, before the Great Bend in the Indian territory, this rainfall is something around 4,000 to 4,200 millimeter. So whenever we are talking about the, say, overall development perspective, so in that perspective we have to keep into account this flood wave formation aspect also, because if you see the flood wave formation as this rainfall scenario, then there are certain locations, there are certain sub basins from where we are getting the maximum flood wave formation, and ultimately all those water is coming into play in the areas, and it is creating a lot of flooding problem. And here in the case of Brahmaputra, you can say this flooding matlab, even 5 year or 10 year return period, it is capable of to create a lot of inundation in the habitat area also. So when another important aspect, that is the water security issue of basically Siang part of the Brahmaputra. Like here, what I am showing you, this how much water we are getting from say Tibet in this river. So the annual is something around 778 BCM, and during the non-monsoon, it is we are getting something around 19 BCM. If you see the same thing just upstream of Pasighat, and near something around this border, one project was planned, this Siang Lower project, and there we have computed ki how much annual water is available, average, that is something around 120 billion cubic meter. And out of that, this non-monsoon water availability from November to April is something around 22.33 BCM. So if you see the net contribution during November to April from this river, from Indian territory, that is something around 3.47 BCM, rest around 18 BCM water we are getting from the Tibet territory. Now, consider the China's diversion plan, because China is having its own problem of the water scarcity in their part. So they are also planning to divert something around 40 billion cubic meter of Brahmaputra water. If that 40 BCM of water they are going to divert, in that case, we will be the worst sufferer during the non-monsoon period, because during the non-monsoon period our contribution is significantly low. During the monsoon period, yes, we are having huge quantity of water, like total say 537 BCM of water what we are getting at India Bangladesh border. Out of that, 120 BCM of water we are getting from the China's territory, and rest 420 BCM of water we are getting from the Indian territory. But out of that 420 BCM, we are getting the majority of water during the monsoon months only. And if you count the number of rainy days, even in Brahmaputra Basin, so we may say that our non-monsoon month is starting from say your June, yeah, May, June, July, August, September. But if you count effective number of rainy days, so in basin like Brahmaputra, it is something around 60 to 65 number of rainy days. In the basin like Ganga, it is 30 to 32 number of rainy days. So that also we have to keep into consideration when we consider this flood planning aspect. So this becomes very important, and so considering the flood planning or flood mitigation aspect as well as this water security aspect, let us do what we can do. Another important aspect, like Dr. Srinivas already highlighted about the what is the China think about the this human water convention, and this very good example. Anybody can see what happened in the Mekong River basin. Like here, number of lower riparians are there, like Laos, Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam. But China is not a member of the Mekong River Commission, and around 60 BCM storage has been created by the China so far in the Mekong River basin, without bothering what is happening to the downstream riparian. So they make pursue or they can go the same way in the Brahmaputra. In the Brahmaputra also, they are planning a cascade development on the main stem of this Siang River itself. So, after highlighting all those things, what we can say, I can say that the important issues regarding the Brahmaputra are in the northeastern region, that is the flood problem, then the non-monsoon water security of Brahmaputra in case consider that scenario when China is going to divert that water. Another important aspect like Majuli Island, one of the very big island, and here the erosion problem of the Majuli Island, then navigability throughout the year, then river morphological issues such like breeding, this rising of river bed level, etc. Then per capita water availability in the country and river interlinking. So these are the important issues on which I would just quickly go through that. So as I have already highlighted that 3,000 or 2,800 millimeter to 3,000 millimeter, that is the average annual rainfall in the Indian part of Brahmaputra Basin, and average annual is something around 537 to 540 BCM. So out of 537 BCM, because when you are going for some considering our water security aspect or this flood problem aspect, then that also we have to see how much contribution is there from the different rivers. So out of 537 BCM, more than 200 BCM is contribution from the Siang, Lohit and Subansiri rivers itself. Then flood contribution of the river Siang, another river Dibang, Lohit and Subansiri. This becomes very important if you want to consider any flood mitigation measure. And another, because number of people that yes, we can go for say flood control measures like flood forecasting and other things, yes, that we are already doing, but yes, in that we can provide a lot of benefit in terms of saving the lives of the people, but we cannot save the whatever the destruction is occurring to the property of the people during the extreme floods. And whenever I am talking about the flood mitigation, so I am not talking yes, we are going to bring down the flood water from say 50,000 cubic to 20,000 cubic. No, that is not possible in a river like Brahmaputra. We can bring down only the flood water from 55,000 or 60,000 cubic to 40,000 cubic, and even 30 or 35,000 or 40,000 cubic flood is a good amount of flood for any environmental concern. So when the people tell about if you are going for the flood control, then what will be is going to happen to environment? So it is not that we are just bringing down this flood value from 50,000 cubic to 10,000 cubic. No, so it is not like that. So then if you see, this is the only I have shown this central assistant part which has been released to northeastern state regarding flood damages. So in 11th plan something around 1052 crore, in 12th plan something around 215 crore, then 505 crore during 2017-21. So these are the only central component. Rest of the certain damages has been borne by the state governments also. So if you consider, if you have to go for any flood moderation also, then we have carried out a very detailed study in this regard also, and what we have found, we considered this Guwahati. So there is one GNT site of Central Water Commission at Pandu, so that we have considered Guwahati as a say first control point, and there we have found that the catchment area of the river is something around 4,17,000 square kilometer. Out of that, how much area is snow fed, how much area is rain fed, that also we have computed. Based on that, what we have found, key in this untapped area, that is something around 1,09,000 square kilometer, and if we consider 100-year flood at Guwahati, then it is something around 62,000 cubic. Out of that, around 34,000 cubic comes from the Siang itself, Siang river. Then 14,000 something like that from the Lohit river, that we are getting something around 13,000 cubic, that we are getting from the Dibang river, and then from Subansiri we are getting something around 20,000 cubic. From untapped catchment, we will, depending upon the rainfall scenario, we are going to get our flood value may vary from 22,000 cubic to 26,000 cubic. So if you want to give or you want to plan some flood mitigation program in that, then you need certain storages. And those storages, we have also worked out how much storage is required. To some, like in Subansiri Basin, what we found, if we are able to provide something around 1.9 billion cubic meter of flood storage. In Dimbang, if you are able to get something around 0.6 BCM of flood storage. In Lohit, if you are going to get something around 1.6 BCM storage, and Siang, if you can get around 9.2 BCM of storage, then we can curtail down this flood peak from 62,000 cubic to something around 40 to 42,000 cubic. And in turn, if you consider entire reach of Brahmaputra, there the water level we shall be able to bring down by 1.2 to 1.6 meter. These are based on the actual gauge data. So if we are planning for 100-year return period flood, then in the case of say lower return period flood of 10 years or 25 years, we are going to get a further good margin of this flood moderation. So this is one of the aspect of the flood moderation. Another, if we are going to capture these flood peaks at these locations, then also we shall be able to tackle a lot of this erosion issue of Majuli Island. Because why this erosion issue? Because of very high current, very high velocity of the water during the monsoon period or during the extreme flood. So that is creating a major erosion problem. So a lot of this fund government of India is pumping to control this erosion issues in the Majuli Island. But if we are able to construct few number of storage projects on these rivers, then that also can be controlled up to some extent. Then another important part, navigability and river morphology. So because whenever we are constructing these dams, so there also we are going to trap certain amount of sediment. So in that turn, if you see this river morphology, you are also going to have certain impact on river morphology also. This whatever this silt deposition or all those navigability, so that is certainly going to provide certain some relief in that regard. And another important aspect, considering this non-monsoon water scenario, so if you are having storage projects, then whatever, if these projects like say end projects are the say base load project, then during these period we shall be able to get a steady flow released into the river, and in that way we shall be able to ensure the navigability issue of the Brahmaputra also throughout the year. And that has it's a lot of potential. And yes, considering the environmental aspect which has been highlighted by Dr. Das also, we have to go ahead in that direction. Then another important aspect, this yes, flooding is also required for wildlife also, but destructive flooding is not required to any wildlife. Like what happened in here during 2012, that flooding was, in that flooding more than 540 animals, including 13 rhinos of this Kaziranga National Park, they died. And another important aspect, during the extreme flooding, what is happening ki from this wildlife sanctuary, most of the animals, they move to the distant high ground, and they become the easy prey of the poachers also. So if you consider this aspect also, because this is also one of the environmental concerns, so from that angle also we are going to get a good amount of relief. Then if you consider per capita water availability of country as a whole, so like in 1951, 5177 meter cube per capita. In 2011, it was 1545. 2025, it is going to be something around 1341. By 2050, 1140. Yes, today perhaps river interlinking, we are not so serious about the river interlinking, but tomorrow, after certain, say 20 years or 25 years, perhaps we won't be able to ensure our water security without evolving a concept of national water grid through river interlinking. So that will be a reality, and in that case this Brahmaputra is going to play a very, very important role, because here huge quantity of water is available, and about 40 BCM of water diversion from Brahmaputra is going to solve a number of water issues of the country as a whole. So these are some of the important links which are planned from the Brahmaputra. One is Manas Sankosh Tista Ganga link. Then this is very important link apart from the other Himalayan links. So this is one of the very vital link for ensuring our water security. And especially if you see the scenario in Pennar Basin, there the per capita water availability is less than 400 meter cube. So we have to consider that aspect also. So with these, I would conclude my presentation here. What I want to say, the well-planned water resources project with a mix of run-of-the-river schemes and storage are essential for development of northeastern region economy through flood control measures, hydropower generation, major employment generation, industrialization, and more effectiveness of anti-erosion works in Brahmaputra Basin. Then reduction in water in the loss of invaluable human life, property, and wildlife, that is possible through these planning. Then water security of the region and the country can be ensured. Then improve the performance of the other run of the river projects located in the same cascade. If you are having storage project, then that is very much possible. Then surplus power will be a source of sustained revenue for the states involved, because nowadays around 12% that free power is given to the state where this project is coming, and 1% extra for the local area development. That 13%, even in the case of Siang storage project, what we have worked out, whatever the cost will be incurred, that can be recovered within the 7 years. So like that, huge quantity revenue generation is possible. Then augmentation in lean season flow will improve the navigability throughout the year. Additional benefits is in the form of, because if you are having the good storage reservoirs, the fishery, in the form of fishery, like you must have heard about this from Ukai reservoir, this hills of fish that is very famous now, and they are even supplying to West Bengal also from the Ukai reservoir. Oh, thank you very much. Here I will just conclude my presentation, and now I will just
Thank you.
stop sharing.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, sir. Definitely a very clear perspective on the present efforts being pursued by the government, and we are extremely grateful to you for have joined us for this webinar, sir. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you, sir. Thank you.
Our next panelist, a very senior person, Dr. Harikrishna Paliwal, sir. He's a PhD holder in botany from Delhi University and an MBA from University of Queensland, Australia. He has been an officer of the Indian Administrative Service and served in the Indian Forest Service before joining the IS. Besides serving as the district magistrate in a number of districts in Uttar Pradesh, he has held important assignments in Uttar Pradesh, Uttarakhand, Arunachal Pradesh, and the Government of India, including that of the Chief Secretary of the Government of Arunachal Pradesh. Presently, he is an advisor to the Government of Arunachal Pradesh, holding the rank of a cabinet minister, where he advises the government on major socio-economic and infrastructure development issues. Paliwal, sir, you have the floor, sir.
I'm grateful that I have been provided this opportunity to speak a few words. Although whatever I wanted to say, much of it has been already said by Pandya sir, then Mr. Rai in a very, very elaborate manner. And of course, Mr. Srinivas also has put up a perspective, that is conflict and legal aspects of it. I would say that Brahmaputra is one of the, as has been highlighted by Mr. Rai and Mr. Pandya, is one of the most important basins of the country. And this basin, particularly the Brahmaputra river that we see in the form of Brahmaputra, major part of water comes from the rivers that flow from Arunachal to Assam. These rivers are Kameng, Subansari, then Siang, Debang, and Lohit. Now, I would say that emphasis has been laid on flood moderation, environmental issues, and also the development of the area. Mr. Pandya was, while making his presentation, has categorically said that while we need to have concern for the environment, we also need to see various aspects of the development of this nation. The same thing was also, in different words, was said by Mr. Srinivas, and majorly had been highlighted by Mr. Rai also. When I say this, I would say that Brahmaputra suffers from floods every year. And there needs to be done something very important, which should have been done 70 years back, 80 years back, or at least must have been made efforts. Of late, for the last about 10 years, 10, 12 years, the efforts have been made in Arunachal Pradesh to develop hydropower projects on all the major rivers. Apart from the developmental aspects of Arunachal Pradesh, I would say the major benefit would not only be going to Arunachal Pradesh, it will be going to the entire nation, I would say. Assam's flood, where we lose many lives every year, thousands of crores of properties is lost every year. Many households are devastated. And as was highlighted by Mr. Nityanand Rai, if the water is stored as projected in various dams to be constructed in these basins of Siang, Dibang, Lohit, Subansiri, then some major relief can be provided in flood control. As well as the issue of water availability in the form of storage can also be addressed. Some figures that I have noted from somewhere say that present storage per capita capacity in India is 209 cubic meters per capita, whereas in Norway it is 8,000. In Brazil it is 2,632. In US 2,192. And in Canada, more than 25,000 cubic meters per capita. So, as was highlighted by Mr. Rai and by Mr. Pandya, I would say that water's availability and water storage are the subjects which the country has to bother immediately about it, so that in future we do not have problems of the extent which can be projected and is being projected in various fora. And some part of it can be taken care of by having storage projects or hydropower projects in Arunachal Pradesh in all these 5 rivers as I mentioned. I would like to mention a very startling figure for the benefit of all of us here, that China and India in 1949 had almost same hydropower potential exploited, which was between 500 and 600 megawatt. There was a very little difference at that point of time. Both of us were almost equal. About 20 megawatts was higher in China. Now today the scenario is very startling. In China, the hydropower potential developed is 3,50,000, more than that I would say. 3,50,000 se bhi zyada they have already created. In India, we are yet to achieve only 50,000. So this is a very grim scenario because, you know, in the longer run and from the perspective of environment, hydropower is in the longer run is very cheap. There are projects which were constructed long back. Their tariff today is somewhere 50 paisa per unit, somewhere 1 rupee is less than 1 rupee. There are many projects in the country where the tariff is like that. And secondly, environment friendly also hydropower is. Unfortunately, in India, we have only the potential of about, as identified by CA, about 1,45,000 megawatt. Of the projects that are more than 25 megawatt capacity. So that put out of that potential of 1,45,000, which has been identified by CA, more than 50,000 is in Arunachal Pradesh alone, in these rivers which I just mentioned. In the rest of the country, where the hydropower potential is about 1 lakh megawatt, there the development has already been done of around 50% capacity. Whereas in Arunachal Pradesh, against a capacity of more than 50,000 megawatt, till date, we have been able to develop only 1,115 megawatt in the projects that are of more than 25 megawatt capacity, which counts only about 2%. Lower Subansiri, as was mentioned by Mr. Rai, which had been stuck up for a very, very long time, more than a decade. Unfortunately, I would say. If we include that also, which is under construction now, once it is completed, then also we shall be at the level of about 6% of the total potential that Arunachal Pradesh has. Therefore, there is an urgent need of developing these projects, which have already been identified. Much work has already been done in the form of their various clearances in a number of projects, I would say. And if we have to consider water storage on one hand, hydropower generation on the other hand, and thirdly, from national perspective overall, I would say the reliable power, dependable power, which is in the form of hydropower, where you can instantaneously switch on the powerhouse and get electricity, which no other power source gives you that liberty and flexibility. In the country, there is a lot of work going on solar and wind energy, which is very much needed. But to supplement that, in the peak hours, we need hydropower. As on date, although technology is developing for storage of solar power in the form of batteries and all, but I'm not very sure whether we will be able to have that much capacity and that much cheaper storage in the longer run of solar power and wind power. Therefore, to supplement hydropower, to supplement this generation of solar power and wind power, which is for defined periods of the day, we need to develop hydropower. We do not have any other alternative as a nation, I would say. We have already delayed this process for last more than 70 years. We should have done it 70 years back. Today, this much of flood should not have caused that much of damage in Arunachal. we would have that power at the rate of less than 1 rupees per unit had we developed 50 years back these projects. And we would have the water storage capacity, and we would not have worried that much today as the worry is being caused today because of lesser per capita water availability in the country. And the future seems to be looking for much more water storage in the country. I would just say that whereas for thermal power or gas-based power, we have to import oil. On the other hand, water is our own resource, which is going down the drain every minute, every second. It is going to the sea without being tapped. And we are paying money to the other countries in the form of foreign exchange for securing energy in the form of petrol, diesel, and gas. Therefore, we need to develop hydropower at the earliest possible, whatever potential is remaining in the country. I am not saying only for Arunachal Pradesh when I say, although we are talking about Brahmaputra Basin today, but I would say the entire country's potential should be immediately planned for development. You see, when we go for hydropower development, the dam life is 100 years, the civil works life is supposed to be 100 years, and the life of electromechanical equipment is supposed to be 35-40 years, whereas the life of thermal power projects is much less. If we consider environmental aspects, there are various issues that had been raised about environment on hydropower projects. I say that because of carbon emissions, glaciers are melting, and once the glaciers are melting, it is a sign that the rivers will also get lesser water in longer term. And maybe there would be some point at some point of time the river may be in the name of rivers, just rivers only, land patches only, without much of water. Therefore, we must have a concern for carbon emission, and for carbon emission, as Government of India has been laying emphasis on solar power and wind power, and now of late there has been concern for development of hydropower also. As I said that we have in Arunachal Pradesh potential of more than 50,000 megawatt of projects, of more than 25 megawatt projects. If we just take 10,000 megawatt in the form of energy, it will save us 32.7133 million metric tons of carbon emissions, which would come otherwise from solar power or the fossil fuel, I would say. So it will be a major achievement if we develop this entire 50,000 megawatt. So 32 multiplied by 5, it will be 160 million metric tons saving of carbon emissions for the country and for the world as a whole. Apart from that, you see, hydropower is also energy, as energy is obtained from petrol or diesel or gas. 10,000 megawatt of hydropower would save us around 9,000 crore of foreign exchange in the form of oil that we are purchasing. So if we develop all 50,000 megawatt, then we should be saving annually almost around 50,000 crore of rupees every year of foreign exchange. Apart from that, if we take the national perspective as a whole, I would say only 10,000 megawatt hydropower projects would need 5 lakh ton of steel and 80 lakh tons of cement. Apart from around 3,000 crore rupees of machines that will be needed for construction. So all these things put together will generate economic activity in the entire country, where steel is being produced, where cement is produced, where these machines are produced. Apart from that, millions and millions of man days will be created in the form of labor and in the form of jobs. And this benefit is not only for Arunachal Pradesh. This benefit will be for the entire country, entire nation, and for the northeastern region as a whole. Therefore, I would say that it is high time that we must seriously look into development of hydropower development in the country, particularly in Arunachal Pradesh and northeastern region. I would say the entire northeastern region also, which would be essential not only for water storage and water availability per capita availability in the country. It will be required for environmental to mitigate environmental problems. It will also be required for mitigating problems of Assam floods and generating overall economic activity in the country. And for, apart from water security, we will be having energy and power security also in the form of peaking power, because we might have problems someday if we do not have hydropower to compensate in the peaking hours for the solar and wind power at the particularly peaking hours. So with these words, I have nothing much to say, but to thank Mr. Rai, Mr. Srinivas and Mr. Pandya for making the points which had already been covered to support what I have said. Thank you very much. That is all I wanted to say.
Thank you so much, sir. Coming from you, it means a lot because you've been there at the top decision-making level, and we would definitely note down the points, and as a follow-up of the webinar, we'll be also working on a report after this. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to request Radhika Session, ma'am. Professor Radhika Session is a historian and retired professor from Pune University and currently a visiting professor at Symbiosis School of Liberal Arts. After obtaining her master's and MPhil in medieval Indian history from the Jawaharlal Nehru University, she went on to complete her doctorate from the University of Pune. She has been part of various research projects and has a long list of publications in her name. She is also the sole author of many books. Her main area of research is maritime and urban history. In recent years, she has begun to focus on the urbanization and maritime history through studies of ports of the Indian Peninsula. Radhika, ma'am, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Kumantadas, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I must say that in the light of all those who have spoken so far, I am moving to a totally different area, which is that of the historical dimensions. everybody so far has talked of the contemporary issues of the Brahmaputra. But I think it is necessary for us to remember that while the contemporary issues are very contemporary, they are also to be understood in the broader context of history and of the region in which the Brahmaputra is situated. And that's where I think I'd like to focus on the idea of the Brahmaputra. Now, we have the idea of Brahmaputra and the idea of the region of the Northeast as a whole. And then highlight, I won't take time, I will highlight a few of the things which I think are of key importance in understanding the ways in which we relate to the region and the river. The first area that I have, well, everybody here has talked of the geography. What is the geography about? The geography is of hills, plains, rivers, which means that we are talking of 3 different ecosystems. We are talking of 3 different cultural contexts, and therefore we are talking also of 3 different knowledge systems of relating to the environment. What do the hills have? How do the hills relate to the river that flows through the valleys and to all the rivers that connect, the rivers and the streams that connect to this great river system? We've talked of the Brahmaputra Basin. We also need to mention the Tista. The Tista as a river which cuts through and which even today is, like the Brahmaputra, an area which has been of tremendous significance and of tremendous danger. These are rivers, the constant memory of living with danger, the constant memory of the ways in which these seasonal variations are to be maintained is something that we must remember. The second is the valley itself. Now, the valley is rich agricultural land. The British from 1890 moved settlers from the lower reaches of the Tista Valley, of the Brahmaputra Tista Valley, to the upper reaches. So particularly in the Silchar and the Lakhimpur area, they deliberately transported people some from Chittagong, some from Midnapur, some from as far away as UP to settle in this area. How has this affected the culture? How has this affected the knowledge of how to deal with agriculture, deal with soil? And then, on a much lighter note, in Kaziranga, we had a guide who told us, no, the Brahmaputra should flush, should flood, because the entire area gets flushed out and cleaned again. Now, if that is a local perspective, then where has this emerged from? We've got the reserves, we've got the land, we've got the people. And I haven't even started talking about the river itself and the monuments along the river. The underwater domain that you talked of, Kamdadas, is something that we need to remember also in terms of livelihood and knowledge. What is the Brahmaputra about? What are the sandbanks? It is a tidal river. As part of the tidal systems, you talked of the dolphins. What other fish are there? How do these fish navigate up and down the river? How are these fish part of the above water cuisine of the region? And how are these to be linked to the entire economy of export and to the entire monetary economy of the region? One of the major sources that we have of the Northeast, and this is where I'm going straight into the historical dimension. One of the most important sources that we have is of the time of Emperor Aurangzeb, when we know that he sent an expedition into the Kamrup area. It's not the first, but it is the one for which we have the maximum records. So into Kamrup, It is interchangeably called Kamarupa and Ahom, the Ahom dynasty, the Kamarupa kingdom. The word Kamarupa goes back to a very, very early time. We have vague mentions of the Kamarupa at a very early point, which talks about the Kamarupa as a region which is at one level strange, but at another level, something which needs to be explored, because it says, and this is where I would link to some of what we were talking about, this was part of the old Tripuri trade route, which moved up from the old Bengal Delta kingdoms of Samataka and Harikela, moved north through the Brahmaputra, moved further north into the Burma Pagan region, and finally connected to the South Yunnan route. This is a connection that we need to remember, we need to reinforce, and we need to understand from the security perspective in current times as well. Let me move to yet another dimension of the traditions. Boats. Brahmaputra has been described as a Nad. It's a male river. It's powerful, it's strong. When you stand on one bank, you feel like you're looking at the sea. And there are stray references, even in the Mahabharata, to this great inland sea, this great expanse of water. All of these, this great expanse of water, fine, but what lies on the shore? We know Guwahati. When you stand at Guwahati, the river seems a nice, peaceful, slow-moving. But if you concentrate on the river, if you stand on that bridge at Guwahati and look at the river down, you can see the undercurrents. How do the people deal with the undercurrents? How, when we are talking of silting, do we deal with the undercurrents? There are records available in the local knowledge of how the silt has been removed and how the silt has been used in different ways. Also, there is local knowledge of navigation and currents, and there are currents. So, what are the currents? How do the currents flow? What changes happen in the currents at the end of the monsoon? What currents indicate the beginning of the monsoon, because that knowledge also exists? And then, what kind of boats are to be used before and after the monsoon? They are not the same. The river in flood, obviously, will not have any boats on it. But then, the river, as it is ebbing and flowing, do you use rafts? Do you use boats? What kind of boats? Where does the timber come from? And this is your link between the ecosystem of the hills and the plains. The timber does come from the hills. Then there is the entire pastoral economy of the hills. India's hills are still pastorally oriented. It's not just in the Northeast. It is all over the country. How does this pastoral culture link to the river? What is their imagination of the river? What is the way in which they mythicize, understand, and connect to the river? If we do not understand local knowledge, if we do not understand, if we do not even map the existing mythologies of river and connections to the river, we cannot go any further. Everybody knows the Kamakhya temple at Guwahati. Why is the Kamakhya temple located at that point of Guwahati near the Brahmaputra, where the floodwaters will not reach the Kamakhya temple at all, even though it's on a plain? What kind of knowledge system of the geography existed? What kind of mapping of the floods happened at that time that the Kamakhya could be located over there? And I'm not even going into the ideology and the entire structures around the deity herself, how the deity is understood. Now, this is an area which is of, I'm moving to yet another, I'm at the moment just identifying areas. I'm not even going into connecting the, the dots, because I don't know enough about the range. But what I have is a whole series of questions which I think need to be looked at a little more carefully. Something that we know, again, is the entire history of textile making across the northeast. Typical of Assam is the Assam Bengal region, North Bengal, Assam, most of Assam, Bengal, Assam, to some extent Bihar. Typical of this region is the off-white sari with the red border. Now the red color dye is typically, the best red color dye comes from the madder plant, which is in the south, in the Deccan. How did the madder get there? And they still use the madder plant, the J root. What are the trade routes that, for textiles, connected the Brahmaputra Valley to the area where J is produced? And then the white. The white, it's actually an off-white. The off-white that you get in the Brahmaputra is a very distinctive color. It's not cream, it's not white, it's somewhere in between. And there are records, textile-based records, which say that to the north, and this is from the south of India, which say that to the north, there is a river which will clean, but will not clean white like the Krishna. So bleaching is supposed to be best done in the Krishna and in the Narmada. There are properties in that river, the chemical properties, which have not been analyzed anywhere. But the Brahmaputra gives you a different color. Why? Is it the same color that you get in different parts of the Brahmaputra? Or does it have something uniform? If it is uniform, what are the chemical properties that exist in that region which allow you to give you that uniformity of color of cloth everywhere? Then move further and slightly away into the Nagaland Manipur region, and you've got your black and red. Where does the dye come from? Where do the looms come from? Are the looms made of bamboo, which is on the hills? Or are they made of the kind of local, specifically lower reaches, Silchar and lower down? That kind of wood is different. What wood is used for the looms? We have not mapped it. There are islands in the river where even now embroidery is practiced. That embroidery is distinctive. It has nothing to do with the Kantha work of Bengal. It is linked to the Kantha work. It is linked to the shadow embroidery, but it is distinctive from all of that. We have what is often today unfortunately called tribal. It isn't tribal. It isn't ethnic. It is regional. We need also to go beyond these words of tribal, ethnic, and go into regional distinctiveness. And here is where I'd come back to the starting point. The Brahmaputra is the distinctive feature of the region, of the economy, of the people, of the culture. And all of this has to be kept in mind when we study the region. Because the river connects, the river also separates. As the river, is there a difference between the north bank and the south bank? Because there is a difference between the upper reaches and the lower reaches. The north bank is much more hilly. You've got the Meghalaya Khasi Garo Jaintia hills. And the south, it does not have that. Is there a difference? Religion is the least of the concerns over here. Ethnicity is also less of a concern. But we have, across the north of India, we have that entire range of the mountainous tracts. What are the connections across these mountainous tracts? Historically, parts of the Silk Route have, well, India has connected through to the Silk Route across Central Asia in two ways. One is through the Darjeeling area, which means that they're looking at the Brahmaputra and the Tista. And the other is, of course, through Samarkand and the rest of that region. Why have we not looked at this route? What is the memory of the people who lived along these routes? We tend to look at it only in terms of modern political conflicts. should we not go beyond that? What I am looking for, therefore, and like I said, this is not an area that I have ever really researched, but these are concerns which have constantly come up and which I think need to be understood before we can look at the ways in which Brahmaputra is to be approached. Peoples, places, cultures, and riverine civilizations. These, I think, are part of the ways in which we need to approach the Brahmaputra. Traditional knowledge is one dimension, but we need to understand that traditional knowledge, we need to acquire it, and we need to connect all of these dots. And bringing it to contemporary times, we need to look at contemporary world also through the lens of the people's memory that led to the contemporary. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, ma'am. This was absolutely fantastic. It's a very different dimension, but very relevant and extremely interesting. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is even more interesting, sir. Samudragupta Kashyap, sir. I know him for a while now, and he has a deep understanding of Assam and the Northeast. Been a journalist for a while, and so is a veteran journalist currently appointed as the Information Commissioner by the Government of Assam. Born in Assam in 1960, Samudragupta Kashyap sir is an alumnus of the prestigious Cotton College of Guwahati and Indian Institute of Mass Communication, New Delhi. He previously worked in Prantik, a renowned Assamese fortnightly magazine, and Dainik Assam, Dainik Assam, the oldest Assamese daily newspaper, for a decade. After that, he was associated for 20 years with the Indian Express, where he earned a name for himself among the other noted journalists of the Northeast. Samudra sir, your turn, please.
Thank you, Arnab. I was intently listening to the previous speakers, Mr. Pandya, Mr. Rai, Mr. Srinivas, Mr. Paliwal. I had attended a couple of press conferences of Mr. Paliwal at Itanagar as a reporter several years ago, and also to Madam Radhika session, the last session, which was much more interesting. I have a different take on the Brahmaputra. One, yes, if I take off from where I'll start from the reverse, from where Madam Radhika Session had left. Yeah, Brahmaputra itself, Brahmaputra is not just one single river. Brahmaputra is a system. Brahmaputra is a concept. Brahmaputra is a culture. Brahmaputra is a civilization. Brahmaputra is a highway of civilizations, if I may be allowed to say so. And it's really, there's no end to the Brahmaputra story. That exactly was why probably I had had the great fortune of working with Bhupen Hazarika for his last project. It was a mega serial project, a 26 episode project for Doordarshan, which was named Brahmaputra An Endless Journey. And in Hindi, it was called Brahmaputra Ek Antihin Yatra, where I had the fortune of doing the research for Bhupen Hazarika on the Brahmaputra and its tributaries, and also to write the script for it. It is available on YouTube now. It's a Doordarshan copyright production, which was done in 2007-2008. And for this project, I had to travel to different corners of the Northeast as part of my, which I anyway used to do as a journalist during, especially when I was at the Indian Express. And in the process, we presented this river and the rivers associated with the Brahmaputra. Though several of my previous speakers have named or mentioned the names of several tributaries of the Brahmaputra, like the Kameng, the Subansiri, the Dibang, the Lohit. In fact, these are rivers these are tributaries which are much, much bigger than the Ganga itself when you look at it at particular stretches. So though they are tributaries flowing into the Brahmaputra, they are rivers by themselves, telling their own respective stories about the people, about the ethnic compositions along them, about the hopes and aspirations, the music, the culture, the literature, the biodiversity along these rivers. Everything is amazing, absolutely amazing. But if I look at it, if you look at it, the Brahmaputra story as such began probably in India, and the written story is available in the Kalika Purana, which was written in Guwahati, where I'm sitting at present, in the 8th or 9th century, or some say it is in the 10th century, which tells the story, story of the birth of the Brahmaputra birth story, which itself is very interesting. These are available these days, even in English. The English text of the Kalika Purana is available. But if I come one by one, first I'd look at the cultural aspect, which Madam Radhika had already mentioned a lot. But then everything that we talk about culture in the Northeast, whether it's music, song, literature, dance, the motifs on the fabric, or the weaving, the folklore, the traditional knowledge, the local science, everything, it revolves around, or is interrelated to the river. The festivals, right from the festivals to the rituals, to the patterns on the make on the looms, to the folk stories. The Brahmaputra or any of those 104 tributaries, they come back again and again and again. So the river has impacted on the people of the region. The river has impacted on the civilizations of the region. The river and its tributaries have impacted on the thinking of the region. And the river itself is as Bhupen Hazarika had said, that Mahabahu Brahmaputra Mahamilana Tirtha. It is the meeting point. It's a Tirtha. It's a conference of Mahamilan. He had said in one of his more than 60 songs he had sung about the river. If you look at the economic aspect of it, much of it has been described or discussed. Number one is transportation and navigation, which was very important in the 19th century and even before. One of the greatest naval battles in the world was fought on the Brahmaputra in Guwahati, and that was also it was in this battle that the Assamese had defeated the mighty Mughal army, and that was also probably the beginning of the downfall of downslide of the great Mughal Empire, 1671, March 14th, 15th rather, the Battle of Saraighat. Then the hydroelectric potential has been already discussed, the vast potential, but then the least development that has taken place, or least utilization. Also, a mention has been made about the per capita water availability in the region, which is said to be 30,500 cubic meters. But then per capita availability is one thing, per capita utilization is another, which is very, very pathetic. So much so that this huge volume of water which flows down from the Tibet, from the Himalayas, from the eastern Himalayas, through the Brahmaputra into Bangladesh, and the people living beside it are just mute spectators to the huge potential, the huge resource that flows away, not even 0.1% of it being utilized. If you look at it, Guwahati, for instance, you take Guwahati as a city, and for utilization of the river, not even 25 or 30% of the drinking water requirement of Guwahati is met from the river, which flows through the city of Guwahati. Same is the case with Dibrugarh, Tezpur, Lakhimpur, Jorhat, Dhubri, Bongaigaon. You name any of the district towns or cities of Assam, all are on the Brahmaputra, but the drinking water is not lifted from the river, and the groundwater is heavily and indiscriminately exploited, so much so that the over exploitation of the groundwater has led to problems of a high content of fluoride and arsenic and so on. Number three is the irrigation. It's better not to talk about irrigation. Irrigation in Assam probably is only a big scam and nothing else. Storage, yes, storage is a very, very important issue. It has been mentioned, but then storage again is related. I was trying to listen, find out if anyone mentions about the fears that have been, the apprehensions that have been made as far as the seismic situation of the Northeast is concerned, because Lower Subansiri hydroelectric project has been stuck there for a long time. Once in a while it takes, the construction begins and again it comes to a standstill, because there's a huge apprehension of the seismic safety of the place, of the region as a whole. Subansiri is the river which had the worst impact of the earthquake of 1950. The river was blocked because of the collapse of the mountains there, and then it led to massive floods post the earthquake in 1950, leading to massive damage, which is there in the memory of the people who were around that place at that time. Tourism, yes, tourism has huge potential. We have not sold, we have not marketed the Brahmaputra as a tourist hotspot. I still remember in 2004 or 5, Mr. Norita da Morita, who was an advisor to the Asian Development Bank and also a tourism advisor of the Mekong countries. He was in Guwahati, he was in the Northeast for a week, and he said this river itself can bring you hundreds and thousands of dollars from foreign countries if this is being marketed well as a river which is worth seeing, worth sailing on it, when worth spending time on the river. And then, but then it has not been done. Even today, you hardly have 3 luxury cruises on the river. And the rest is just unutilized as far as tourism is concerned. Yes, mention of Majuli has been made. Majuli is just one spot on the river. I think a lot of needs to be done to tell the story of the Brahmaputra outside and make it a real tourist destination. As far as the environmental aspects are concerned, yes, floods is a very big issue. Next to flood is the riverbank erosion. Every year, I think several hundred acres of land goes into the Brahmaputra and its tributaries, and these are never recovered. We have the storage problem, as I said. Then the flood cushioning is again a big problem, and there's been a debate on whether we really need embankments on both sides of the river to restrict the flow of the river on a particular channel. And so in the process, what we have done is that during the high floods, during the high monsoons, we have prevented the water, the excess water being flowing into the villages, into the into the wetlands, and in the process, the entire community, the entire state stands at the risk of the embankments breaking and floods occurring, which is a regular feature in Assam. Then comes the encroachment and the settlement on the river. See, on the Brahmaputra is a very peculiar river. It's a phenomenon by itself, which creates sand bars and sand islands on it every year at one place, and then it removes it a few years later and takes it and it creates it another place. But at certain places, some of these sandbars, which are not necessarily islands like Majuli. Majuli is a permanent island, but the other sandbars which have been occupied by people, occupied by migrants from other places, and these have led to the obstruction of the free flow of the river. In the process, what has happened? The sandbar or the sand island is in the middle of the river. It has been occupied. Human settlement has taken place on that. Trees have been grown on that. Houses have been built on that. And in the process, the water flow, it hits on that and flows sideways. And the permanent river bank, the banks of the river are being eroded away, taken away as a permanent loss. 10 years later, 5 years later, the sandbar, the sand island is also taken away, and you have a huge population which becomes homeless. Now, this is a recurring feature which has been there and this is a very major problem. And some governments in the past had also given settlements, permanent settlements to the people on these sandbars, which are not permanent. Majuli is one thing, but the char, as we call them, are different. Then yes, aquatic, the aquatic life on the Brahmaputra. The freshwater dolphin is just one example. The freshwater dolphin is just one example of aquatic life in the Brahmaputra. Yes, Madam had already said that the fish, for instance. I think the Brahmaputra has one of the highest fish variety in the world. The hilsa also belongs to the Brahmaputra. Up to from downstream from Bangladesh up to Bongaigaon in western Assam, the hilsa is there. And Assam, the smaller variety of hilsa is available within Assam. Yes, then you have several other varieties of fish which are there, peculiar, some of them peculiar only to the Brahmaputra, not only to the Brahmaputra alone. Like as a resident of Assam, as an Assamese, I know that this particular tributary of the Brahmaputra is only known for this particular fish variety. Like there's a river near Dibrugarh called Sesa, which is only for pavho, pavda they call it in Bengal. The pavho is available, the best variety of pavho fish is available only on the Sesa, a tributary of the Brahmaputra near Dibrugarh. Likewise, there's a fish called borali in Assamese. Borali is the best of the borali is available on the Kakodunga River, which is a tributary of the Brahmaputra, which is also the boundary between Jorhat and Golaghat district in Upper Assam or Eastern Assam. That we know, and then like Dikrong. which flows by the side of Itanagar and flows into the Brahmaputra near Narayanpur in Lakhimpur. That again is known for some other river, some other fish, and so on. So these are the fish variety there. But as we are discussing about the dolphin, yes, dolphin is really facing a crisis because not because of various activities, but a specific activity. Because one particular river is specifically one particular tributary of the Brahmaputra, the Kulsi, just about 25 kilometers west of Guwahati, is an abode of the freshwater dolphin. But then, thanks to rapid industrialization on the outskirts of Guwahati, just beyond the west of the Guwahati airport, a lot of new factories and plants have come out there, chemical factories, and most of the waste, the chemical effluent, flows out to the Kulsi, and Kulsi today is facing a crisis, one of water quality deterioration, and two, risk of the number of dolphins are getting reduced. Number three is becoming unnavigable. Number four, that it used to also be a drinking water source for people living by its side. That is also increasing the damage and so on. So I think that's one more area. If we look at the Brahmaputra, the history of the Brahmaputra board, which had been mentioned by Mr. Rai and others at the beginning of this session, if you look at the original statement of the Brahmaputra board, you'll find that it had talked about storage of water at the higher upper reaches of some of the 5 major tributaries of the Brahmaputra in the eastern Himalayas in Arunachal Pradesh. And it had also said, I remember very clearly, I have it with me, that once those storages are created, the high flood level of the Brahmaputra during the high monsoon would be controlled by at least 1.5 meters. This is the specific word that was used, 1.5 meters. That has been mentioned by Mr. Rai, I remember half an hour ago. But at that time, probably we had not taken into account that how much of earth activity, how much of earth work would take place in Arunachal Pradesh in the next 50 years after Brahmaputra board was created. Look at two long roads being constructed, Trans-Arunachal Highway, along the middle of the Arunachal Pradesh from Tawang in the west to Kanubari in the east, and also a foothills road which is coming up. Only two roads I'm talking about. The amount of earth that has been pushed out from the mountains for construction of this road, everything is coming down to the main Brahmaputra down there. Likewise, a lot of development activities. Every small circle in Arunachal Pradesh administrative circle is today a district town. So there are a lot of human activity, there are a lot of developmental activity, there are a lot of road construction happening, a lot of townships are being developed, and every move involves a bulldozer and cutting of the earth. Where does that earth go? It all flows down to the Brahmaputra. I'm sure that the riverbed of the Brahmaputra had already risen by more than 1.5 meters, which was emphasized in the Brahmaputra board preamble or at the introduction to the Brahmaputra board in the late 1970s. So this is one aspect we need to see. How much of water? Yes, Brahmaputra carries it's one of the rivers which carries the most maximum amount of silt when it flows down from the mountains, particularly the eastern Himalayas, into Bangladesh. But in this aspect, I think we need to also look at it. Two more things I would like to put. One is that we need to. I think there have been a lot of apprehensions among the local communities about the developmental activities that the government has in mind or has already launched, right from the hydroelectric projects in the upstreams and the tributaries in Arunachal Pradesh, to the dredging of the river, to the construction of bridges. Because if you look at again, the western portion of each of the bridge on the Brahmaputra, whether it's a Saraighat in Guwahati, between Bongaigaon and Jogigopa, or between Tezpur and Koliabor, you'll find that immediately after the bridge, the river has expanded and it has caused a lot of riverbank erosion. That means what happens is that the river gets constricted there, and then there is a sudden flush of water coming out. So after every river, the Morigaon erosion in Morigaon district, that is on the south of the Brahmaputra, west of the Kolia-Bhomra bridge. That is one classic example. Palasbari is an endless story immediately west of Guwahati, which has been a story of erosion, of riverbank erosion in post-independent India. The similar apprehensions have been made about Majuli Island, which would be probably which they say would be affected because of the new Bogeybill bridge there, and so on. So these apprehensions need to be really allayed. These fears need to be allayed, and for that we probably need a multi-pronged advocacy strategy. One, to allay the fears and apprehensions that are there in the minds of the people. Number that because of the 1950 earthquake experience that people have in mind. Number two is that the transboundary system of rivers that we have in the Brahmaputra system itself, because Brahmaputra, not alone Brahmaputra from Tibet, but then there are so many other rivers which flow in from Tibet and Myanmar into the Brahmaputra, also from Bhutan, then also from Meghalaya and Nagaland. These are not from Manipur, of course. So these are the places that there are interstate river movement and international transboundary river movements there, and also Assam, Bangladesh transboundary rivers that flow out, including the Brahmaputra, several of them. So there are a lot of potentials there, but there are a lot of apprehensions. So we need to probably draw up a strategy, taking all these stories, all these aspects into mind that my previous speakers have said, so that we create an atmosphere where we have a lot of support from the people. There's a clear understanding. Yes, we need to explore the hidden potentials of it, but not by uprooting communities altogether. Small communities are there which are known, which exist as a community because they live on a particular river. The Mishing community, for instance, the Mishing without a river is meaningless. You cannot transport the Mishing people to Punjab or to Haryana or even to Guwahati to the mountains. It's like that. They are inseparable from that. The Adi is just inseparable from the river. For the people who live by the Kameng, the Sherdukpens and the Monpas, they cannot be taken away from the river. You cannot remove the river from the person, from the community, from the music, from the song, from the identity. So these issues also need to be addressed. And finally, I come back again to the cultural aspect and the tourism and the economic related to it or intertwined to it is that telling the Brahmaputra story, selling the Brahmaputra story, not only to the global audience, the research audience there, the tourists there, and also to the scientific community there, but also to the Indian audience, to the Indian tourist, for whom the Brahmaputra can make a fantastic pilgrimage, because the Ganga flows into the Brahmaputra. Number one. Number two, on a particular day, the day of Ashokastami, all the Brahmaputra is considered to be the holiest of all the places of Indian pilgrimage that exist in Indian mythology and Indian mind and Indian culture. One dip on the Brahmaputra that takes away sins of 7 lives. It is said that way Brahmaputra is an endless story, Brahmaputra is an endless journey, Brahmaputra is a meeting place, Brahmaputra is life, Brahmaputra is hope, Brahmaputra is aspiration, Brahmaputra is the story, Brahmaputra is the future, Brahmaputra is also the tragedy, Brahmaputra is also the source of joy and source of tears for the people of Assam and the Northeast. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of this, and I'm sure I have not crossed that time limit that was allotted to me. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, sir. It was not only emotional, but so much content in it. Thank you very much. And we look forward to connecting with you and looking at more aspects of the river. Thank you very much, sir. We have a very important speaker here. The Rajpath Infracon has been very kind to jointly collaborate with MRC and setting up a center of excellence, and they are supporting us in this entire series of Brahmaputra webinars that we are doing and many more other activities that we are planning. We have Dr. Rajendra Hiramat sir, who has over 25 years of professional experience in infrastructure space and entrepreneurship. Dr. Hiramat is a seasoned professional in finance and administration. He holds a doctorate degree in business administration and finance. He began a consultancy in finance and administration in 1995. He entered the renewable energy field in 2002. He also worked in an independent advisory for many government and private sector projects and with his unparalleled connect with the society. Dr. Hiramat has been an inspiration to many professionals and social sector workers. I've known sir for now almost 3 years, and I really admire him for his deep understanding on various issues. Hiramat sir, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to all of here who are present for this webinar for last more than 2.5 hours. All the panelists, Dr. Pandya, Dr. Srinivas, Mr. N. Rai, Dr. Paliwal, Mr. Arnab Das himself, then the last speaker, Mr. Kashyap, and most interestingly, who put forth her views as regards the history of Brahmaputra, Ms. Radhika Madam. Good evening to all of you. It has been an enlightening webinar because all these panelists who are domain experts have put forth their views on the topic, discussed various issues, problems, opportunities, and the probable solutions for developing the Brahmaputra river basin. I think the present central government, which has been working under the leadership of Honorable Prime Minister Narendra Ji Modi, has taken a lot of policy reforms, and not only those reforms have been announced, but most of the projects like Sagarmala, Bharatmala, inland water transport have been put into execution, which have definitely helped our country to strengthen our geopolitical position, and not only positioning, but the government has been striving hard to capitalize all those available resources to the maximum extent. We can all witness that the government is putting all out efforts to achieve safe, secure, and sustainable growth model on all fronts by involving all the stakeholders. It is very important and pertinent to note that government, yes, it has constraints of resources. Resources means maybe financial resources, management skills. So understanding these constraints, government has involved the private sector on a very large scale to develop the nation in various walks of life, in particular the infrastructure facilities. We are all proud to see that our economy, being one of the fastest growing economy in the world, is taking big jump even in the pandemic and has proved its strength. With our foreign exchange reserves surpassing the foreign debt, now the government is in a position to invest more funds on more nation building activities, and the focus is obviously on infrastructure facilities and inland water transport, hydropower projects, etc. The achievements so far have been very encouraging. The recent budget has announced river linking of in 5 of the projects, and the government thrust is clear to build the nation through developing infrastructure facilities. The policies are also encouraging so that the private sector players are taking keen interest by partnering with the government. At the same time, I think the thrust is also on development that is sustainable development, so that the environmental and ecological balance is not lost. Unfortunately, we all witnessed that during last so many years, there has been development at the cost of destruction. So, realizing this aspect, and the same aspect has been discussed by all the panelists, or the concern has been put forth by all the panelists, I think government is sensitive on these issues also. I am not from the domain, as Dr. Arnab Das sir has said. I am from the finance field, and so I see a lot of opportunities coming here for the infrastructure players, and Rajpath is one of the player which intends to enter into new infrastructure sector, and that's why we have joined hands with Maritime Research Center to develop all sorts of resources and encash the future opportunities. While doing this, I do understand that the government, Mr. Dr. Arnab Das has said that technology is a constraint, and every time the foreign technology can't help us to resolve our own problems. And I think in that direction also, the government has taken a lot of efforts. It has encouraged startups, given a lot of funding. It has also marked so many sectors for Make in India projects. And I think now the responsibility on MRC, all the scholars, policymakers, and the central government is to see that we capitalize on the facilities, on the policies that the government is offering to us, and whatever is in our mind as far as Brahmaputra Basin River development is concerned must be materialized in a given time frame. I wish all the best to Dr. Arnab Das and MRC for all these efforts, and thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to share my views. Thank you. Thank you once again.
Thank you so much, sir. It's extremely encouraging, and we look forward to working together to take this to the next level. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Our last panelist, but not the least, Dr. Rajeshwari Raina, ma'am, and we've been working together on some of these issues. She's a PhD in economics and is a professor with the Department of International Relations and Governance Studies, School of Humanities and Social Sciences at the Shiv Nada University, and Associate Director of the University's Center for Policy Affairs and Critical Theory. She is a well-known researcher and participant in several environmental and developmental programs in the public policy and scientific research programs, both nationally and internationally, and is an ardent advocate of bioeconomic approach to a prosperous, equitable, and sustainable world. Rajeshwari, ma'am, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Commander Das, and it's been a great learning experience today, listening to all the speakers here. So it's been a really, really rich session. As our previous speaker mentioned, it's been 2.5 hours, but it's been really, I mean, I didn't realize it was so long. It was so rich. My duty today is to kind of summarize, but also probably draw a couple of key insights from what we heard today. What is, I think one of the speakers earlier said Brahmaputra is like an ocean. Yeah, my first sighting of the Brahmaputra was on a flight, and it was Suhas Paranjape. And those of you who know Sopicom in Maharashtra, Suhas Paranjape and I were taking a flight from Calcutta to Guwahati, and Suhas said, we will fly over the Brahmaputra, and we said, okay, fine, we'll wait. And we looked down, and there was this ocean, sea, and then the person sitting next to us said, this is not the sea, this is the river. It was fascinating. It is huge. And that said, again, what I would like to take off from this rich set of discussions that we've had
are two major points. One is, I'd start with Dr. Pandya's observation about the ways in which we see a river and the ways in which we see interventions. Interventions like Dr. Sheshan mentioned, about deciding which wood to use, what kind of boats to build, what kind of, well, let's say mud and colors, bleaching colors, a whole range of decisions there. Two decisions about, the ways in which we see water. That is, we see water as going waste into the ocean. To questions of, needs to invest in hydropower. And there's a whole music, Bhupen Hazarika, very rich discussion there. So that we've seen, let's say different shades of, lenses that are used. And also, the, as Dr. Pandya reminded us, the might of some decision makers to impose, our will on questions of distribution, right? I mean, on what we think is the right way to distribute water. Here again, distribution without reference to the context, the history and evolution of, not just the river, but people, their lives in these ecosystems. There's a lot that weighs on the kind of lens that we use. So I think for me, one big takeaway is the lens that we use. Yeah. One of our teachers we run a program called Water Science and Policy, an MSc program. One of the lessons that Professor John Kurian, who was also one of my teachers, says is about how our rivers and the water that they carry into the ocean, that is the relatively thin top layer of less saline water, is what actually decides the monsoon that we have. That is, it's the major driver of the very rainfall that keeps the rivers alive. So how can water flowing into the ocean be waste? So it's like, as some of our speakers mentioned, the entire cycle of this water cycle, the river as a life system. Again, many speakers mentioned the massive watershed and the richness of these mighty rivers that flow into as what we call tributaries, but they are mighty rivers in and of themselves. So the big basin and its diversity, that's again a big lesson here about the ways in which these rivers are not just channels of water, as Anthony Acchiavati says, but you look at each transect and they are actually rich networks of social and ecological systems with their own, massive, again, very rich and diverse networks of trade, whether it's of color used to dye or the bleaching properties or wood for the looms. Again, the intellect of small cocoon collectors. My friend Das and I have a study on this to say, how does a cocoon collector know that these are the households that have cocoons that are ready to be used, ready to be woven up, or the silk to be extracted from these. So there are networks of decision makers operating in these valleys, and without attention to these, it's really frightening when we think of what we can do as decision makers. We, as the academic, policy makers, hydrology, the people with power, and also this is the last point that I get from this. And allow me to say this, again, one of the let's say interesting books that we teach is Rohan D'Souza's book called Damned and Drowned. I'm sorry Partha Das was not here, but Partha was one of the organizers of a conference where we took some of our students to also from Delhi from Shivnadar University to this conference. Where Arup Jyoti Saikia, we had up, in our previous panel, we had people, speaking about this. We had a range of people, and also in this OKD Institute. The seminar spoke about the Northeast as a corridor development, that is India's Northeast policy, and the Northeast as a corridor of development. And its rivers as resources, right? So the question there, Sanjeev Barua, Rohan D'Souza, they were all there. The question was about how we as I'm speaking specifically about us, the educated people of mainland India, see the Northeast. and I find it, well, not just slightly disturbing, but also to take this piece from Dr. Pandya, that our ability to say things without consideration of, without considering what the Northeast is like. I mean, it's such a tapestry of richness and diversity, and we see power. We see environmentally benign hydro power projects, and I don't see that, and I'm kind of well, worried. One, but two, recalling again another great scholar, Nicholas Georges Erosion, who writes in 1975 that the Earth will, the global economy will succumb to its own, the heat and pollution of its own energy intensity. It will not be a dearth of resources, but it will be its own pollution. It will be its own, it will suffocate, it will choke under its own pollution, heat, that is global warming, right? This is written in the 1970s. Now, we know that this is an era where, whether it is climate change or a whole range of other environmental disruptions, we know that we have crossed several planetary boundaries. And we know that a region like northeastern states of India is rich with local knowledge that knows how to live within what we know as nature systems, right? I mean, how to live within these systems and live happily, live with a good understanding of what can be, what is at balance and what is at risk. Now, hydropower, the ways in which, well, whether it's hydropower or solar or thermal power, there is no other option but to reduce our demand for energy. I don't think, this is again not me saying this, not just me saying this, but this again was one of the at least the questions that came up at this COP26 and also in COP24, which was a big question there too, about reduce, recycle, reuse are the 3 R's that have been given to us to live sustainably, right? We don't seem to take the reduce very seriously. And there are ways in which we can reduce our energy intensity. There are ways in which we can reduce our, well, footprint, environmental footprint on the world. Keeping our rivers healthy, especially given this, I think it was Dr. Chukukula who mentioned how data, that is information that we need from China, from other states, that we can share, and the ability to take what we call, climate action, multilateral climate action, not just as bilateral relationships and trade and questions of currency and pricing and so on, but also questions of how we can work together. That's of prime importance. So it is drawing from this point about what the environment is. The environment is something that we all remember, all know. It's not just a question of this particular mighty river and its river basin, but the environment in itself. Nature doesn't understand national boundaries. Yeah? We do, and we have to find ways of respecting and well, keeping our national security intact. Yes, but we have to do that within this, well, within our location in, well, a natural system, in a planet with its boundaries which are being violated every day. We have to find a way of doing this within this, well, let's say, nature's or nested systems. There are several ecological studies on this, again, also about rivers and what submergence does to not just to forests and rainfall, but also to people who are dispersed, who are displaced, people who lose their roots, livelihoods that are lost. So there's a whole range of questions that we need to address here. For me, this session was interesting from several angles, yes. But the last point that I want to make here is we all know about institutions as rules and norms and ways of working and thinking about the world. That is, Veblen defines it as habits of thought of the generality of men, the broadest definition possible, right? Douglas North makes a very more specific definition of institutions as transaction costs and rules and, informal and formal exchanges with different rules and so on. But most importantly, when Dr. Chukukula talks about rules, institutional arrangements that are needed, we come back to this question that both Dr. Pandya, Dr. Sheshan, Dr. Chukukula, and others, all of them were raising. what are the lenses? What are the rules and norms, the lenses that we use to see this river? And I think that is where the biggest, well, let's say, problem lies. As long as we see one domain or one lens, the economy or pricing of a unit of energy, we don't see the other lenses. As long as we see, well, let's say, just a question of identity, a home identity or some identity of that sort, we don't see the rest of the picture, that is how this whole environmental and social connections do exist, again, because of the river, right? That is, the river is a connector. The river is, as Rangarajan and Siddharlov says, we often see our water bodies as the Bay of Bengal, for instance, as cuts us off from the rest of the world. But it was the biggest connector. It was the biggest relationship builder across these seas. Yeah, Indonesia and Philippines, we had relationships with all of them in the subcontinent. So for me, I think the major lesson, again, the major request to all of us is to reconsider the one demand that Commander Das keeps making, when he says, well, let's work together. We all have stakes in this. Yeah, we all have our differences. We all come with our own little lenses, right? But we don't have a choice. We have now, reached a point where we are actually putting our nation at risk. We're putting the planet at risk. And we're also doing it in, as Dr. Pandya said, in a very imperious way, deciding about whose equality or inequality can be just written off. It doesn't matter, right? We can submerge certain lands, we can destroy certain people and livelihoods. It's okay. Yeah, that must end. And as Dr. Pandya reminded us, we have to be careful about this, and that we have to work together. I'm sorry, I'm not mentioning everybody's insights. It was such a rich discussion, but the fact that the opportunity to work together does exist and that we can build on it is something that we should work on and consciously use this facility that this Maritime Research Center is opening up for all of us to work. And I sincerely hope we will continue to work together on such important questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It couldn't have been anybody else to have summed it up so beautifully. And I think I will not take, the idea was to bring the entire spectrum of expertise and disciplines and point of views, and lenses is the word which, ma'am, you also used to kind of bring that into the interaction and the debate, and then churn out or filter out what is important and what are the priority areas. And as you rightly mentioned, and I think each one of us have agreed that some urgent steps are required. Something very urgently needs to be done. Otherwise, we'll be extremely irresponsible to the next generation. So I think we've already gone beyond the time. I will request Ananya to come in, our research associate who's handling the Brahmaputra project in a very serious manner, and she has done a huge amount of study on this topic, and I would request her to propose the vote of thanks. Personally, I must thank each one of the panelists who have come and shared very valuable insights and spared so much time for us. Thank you so much. Ananya, the last word to you.
Thank you, sir. And good evening to one and all present here, honorable speakers, respected Director Arnab Das, and all the participants. It's such an honor for me to get this opportunity to thank all the dignitaries and the participants on behalf of Maritime Research Center. I would like to express my gratitude to all the delegates of the webinar and for their presence and the contribution they did to make this a very great dialogue through their thought-provoking, enlightening, and insightful discussions, along with your shared views and expertise in this domain. This framework is fairly new and the space is very new, and it's very motivating seeing so many experts coming together and inspiring us youth to work on it. Thank you so much for inspiring and encouraging us as always. Wishing everyone a very good health amidst this pandemic and a very good day. Thank you.